After 8 years of transforming my father's struggling manufacturing company into a $50 million industry leader, I heard the words that shattered everything. At our annual shareholder meeting, my father stood up, placed his hand on my brother's shoulder, and announced with a proud smile, "Michael will be taking over as CEO next month." My stomach dropped, but years of business negotiations taught me to keep my expression neutral. I nodded and raised my glass in a toast while my mind raced with one thought. This isn't over. I can still replay that moment in perfect detail. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ornate ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel, crystal chandeliers catching the light, tables adorned with arrangements of white roses and hydrangeas. The company's 30th anniversary celebration, with every board member, key investor, and family friend in attendance. A celebration I had organized to showcase our unprecedented growth, now transformed into my public demotion. My father, Richard Calloway, standing at the head table in his custom navy suit, silver hair perfectly combed, exuding the confidence of a man who had never doubted his decisions. My brother Michael beside him, trying to appear humble but unable to hide the satisfaction in his eyes. And me, wearing the burgundy dress I'd chosen specifically because it conveyed authority, now feeling like it might as well be made of paper. To Calloway Manufacturing's bright future, my father continued, and to a smooth transition of leadership into the next generation. The room erupted in applause, champagne glasses clinking, congratulations directed at Michael, sympathetic glances thrown my way. 8 years of my life, 8 years of 18-hour days, missed vacations, relationships sacrificed on the altar of Calloway Manufacturing. 8 years of transforming a regional metal parts supplier on the brink of bankruptcy into an advanced materials powerhouse with clients across 3 continents. And this was my reward. I maintained my composure throughout the evening, accepting condolences disguised as congratulations with grace. "You've done such amazing work, Sarah. The company wouldn't be where it is without you. I'm sure you'll find an exciting new challenge." Each well-meaning comment drove the knife deeper. My mother approached during a brief moment alone, her eyes conveying what her words couldn't. "You know how your father is about tradition," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "He always imagined his son would continue the Calloway name in business. The name. That was the heart of it, wasn't it?" Calloway Manufacturing, founded by my grandfather Jacob Calloway in 1988, passed to my father in 2003, and now being handed to Michael. Not because he had earned it, but because he shared the same last name on his birth certificate. Never mind that he had spent the past decade bouncing between failed startups and extended finding himself trips abroad, only returning to the family business 18 months ago when his latest venture capital well dried up. I excused myself, shortly after the speeches concluded, claiming an early morning meeting. In reality, I couldn't bear another minute of watching Michael accept accolades for a success he had no part in building. The drive home along the coast should have been calming, the moonlight reflecting off the Pacific, usually my favorite view. Tonight I barely noticed it. My penthouse apartment felt emptier than usual as I kicked off my heels and poured myself 2 fingers of the 30-year-old scotch I'd been saving for a special occasion. This wasn't the celebration I'd imagined, but it seemed fitting nonetheless. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, the same view I'd promised myself when I was working from a cramped office with broken air conditioning during my first year at Calloway. "To the next chapter," I whispered to myself, the expensive scotch burning my throat. I hadn't cried since I was 16, and my father told me that business school was a waste of money for someone who would just get married and have kids anyway. I hadn't cried when I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton, and he skipped the ceremony for a golf tournament. I hadn't cried when I joined the family company despite more lucrative offers, only to be assigned to the failing industrial sales division that everyone had written off. And I wouldn't cry now. Instead, I did what I always did when faced with a problem. I analyzed it. I opened my laptop and pulled up the company records. Callaway Manufacturing had been worth approximately $6 million when I joined, a far cry from its heyday under my grandfather, but still afloat. The first year had been about stopping the bleeding, cutting unprofitable product lines, renegotiating supplier contracts, modernizing our antiquated accounting systems. The second year focused on stabilizing key client relationships that had been neglected. By year 3, I had identified our opportunity. Specialized aerospace components made from advanced composite materials, a growing market with high barriers to entry and enormous profit potential. My father had resisted the pivot initially. "We make metal parts, Sarah. We always have." But the numbers couldn't be argued with, and I'd eventually worn him down. The transition had been brutal. Retooling the factory, retraining workers, securing the necessary certifications. I'd worked 100-hour weeks, sleeping on a cot in my office more nights than I cared to remember. And it had worked. Spectacularly. Our first aerospace contract had led to others. Our proprietary manufacturing process had generated multiple patents. Revenue had increased year over year, reaching $50 million this quarter with projections to hit $75 million by year-end, all of which made tonight's announcement even more baffling. Michael knew nothing about advanced materials. He had never negotiated a contract, designed a production workflow, or managed a team larger than 3 people. Placing him at the helm wasn't just an insult to me. It was an existential threat to the company itself. I scrolled through financial reports, board meeting minutes, ownership structures. My father still held 51% of the company shares, which gave him the authority to appoint the CEO. I owned 22%, gifted gradually as performance bonuses over the years. Various minor investors held the remaining 27%, most of them family friends, who would follow my father's lead without question. The ownership structure confirmed what I already knew. My father had the legal right to make this decision, regardless of how misguided it might be. I closed the laptop and moved to my home office, a space decorated with the artifacts of my success, industry awards, framed photos with key clients, the scale model of our first aerospace component. My gaze settled on a particular photograph. Me, at age 10, sitting on my grandfather's lap in his office, both of us laughing as I pretended to review financial statements. "My little CEO," he used to call me. Grandfather had built Callaway Manufacturing. From nothing, working his way up from the factory floor of another company before striking out on his own. He had recognized my aptitude for business early, spending hours teaching me about manufacturing processes, quality control, and the importance of taking care of your people. "The company is only as strong as the hands that build our products," he would say. What would he think of tonight's announcement? Of the company he built being handed to someone who had never shown any interest in it until recently? As the city lights twinkled below, a clarity began to form in my mind. This wasn't just about me or my wounded pride. This was about the 237. Employees who depended on Callaway Manufacturing for their livelihoods. About the clients who trusted us with critical components. About my grandfather's legacy. I hadn't fought this hard, for this long. To watch it all dismantled because of outdated notions of succession. By the time the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting long shadows across my apartment, I had made my decision. I wouldn't go quietly. I wouldn't resign in protest. I wouldn't start over somewhere else. I would fight. And unlike my father and brother, I came prepared for battle. The morning after the announcement, I arrived at Callaway Manufacturing headquarters at 6:15 a.m., just as I had nearly every day for the past 8 years. The massive glass and steel building, another of my initiatives, replacing the crumbling factory office my father had refused to update, gleamed in the early morning light. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I designed it to reflect both our heritage and our future. Industrial strength with cutting-edge innovation. Today, it felt like a stranger's home I was no longer welcome in. I nodded to the security guard, who seemed surprised to see me. "Morning, Ms. Calloway. Thought you might take today off after the big party last night." "No rest for the weary, Jim," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The aerospace division doesn't run itself." The elevator ride to the executive floor was mercifully empty. I needed these few moments to compose myself, to press down the anger that threatened to bubble up each time I thought about last night. The polished doors opened to reveal our COO, David Chen, already at his desk. "Sarah," he said, looking up with concern written across his features. David had been my first significant hire, poached from a competitor with the promise of building something extraordinary. He'd been my right hand through every phase of our transformation. "I tried calling you last night. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said automatically, the response so practiced it required no thought. "Just surprised, like everyone else." David followed me into my office, still my office at least for the next month, and closed the door behind him. "This is bullshit and you know it. What the hell is Richard thinking?" I set my bag down carefully, arranging it just so on the credenza. "Apparently, he's thinking it's time for the prodigal son to assume his rightful place. Michael knows nothing about this business. Nothing." David ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "The Lockheed Martin contract alone requires someone who understands the technical specifications inside and out, not to mention the regulatory compliance issues, or the expansion into European markets. All valid points that I'm sure my father considered deeply before making his decision," I replied, my tone so dry it could have dehydrated the Pacific. David stared at me. "How are you so calm right now? If it were me, what would you have? Me do, David? Scream? Throw things? Resign in a blaze of righteous indignation?" I turned to the window, looking out at the mountains in the distance. None of those options serve my interests, or the company's. "So you're just going to accept this?" The disappointment in his voice stung more than I cared to admit. I turned back to him, letting him see a glimpse of the determination I'd been masking. "I said none of those options serve my interests. I didn't say I was accepting anything." A small smile crossed his face. "There she is. I was worried for a minute. Give me time. I'm working on something." I glanced at my watch. "Don't we have the quarterly operations review at 9? David nodded, recognizing my signal that the personal conversation was over. "I'll have the updated projections ready by then." After he left, I allowed myself one moment, just one, of pure, unadulterated emotion. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the rage and hurt and disappointment coursing through me like electricity. Then, like closing a circuit breaker, I shut it down. Compartmentalized. Emotions were a luxury I couldn't afford right now. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Hope there are no hard feelings, sis. Dad says you'll stay on to help with the transition. Lunch today to discuss?" No hard feelings, as if this were a minor disagreement over the last slice of pizza, not the culmination of my life's work being handed to someone who'd shown up yesterday. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled up the confidential file I'd started compiling at 3 a.m. Project Phoenix, I'd named it, appropriate for what I had in mind. By 8:30, messages had begun flooding in. Clients concerned about the leadership change, employees seeking reassurance, industry contacts expressing surprise. I responded to each. With the same measured professionalism, change was natural in any organization. Michael brought fresh perspectives. I remained committed to our company's success. The platitudes tasted like ash, but the alternative, admitting I'd been blindsided and demoted, was unthinkable. At 8:45, my assistant Melissa knocked tentatively on my door. "Your father would like to see you before the operations review." Of course he would. I straightened my blazer, checked my reflection in my phone screen, and made the short walk to the corner office that had been my grandfather's, then my father's, and would soon be Michael's. Richard Calloway sat behind his massive oak desk, reviewing papers with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. At 62, he still cut an imposing figure, over 6 feet tall with the build of the college football player he once was, silver hair his only concession to age. "Sarah, good, you're here." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I thought we should discuss the transition plan." I sat, crossing my legs and folding my hands in my lap. Poised, professional, giving nothing away. "What would you like to discuss?" "Michael will need your help getting up to speed on the aerospace contracts. I've told him you'll stay on through the end of the quarter to ensure continuity." Not a request, a statement. As if my continued employment was a foregone conclusion. As if I had no choice but to facilitate my own replacement. "I see," I said, my voice neutral. "And what role do you envision for me after the transition period?" My father looked momentarily uncomfortable, the first crack in his authoritative facade. "Well, that's something we should discuss. Perhaps a different division? The consumer products initiative you proposed last year might be worth revisiting." The Consumer Products Initiative. A small side project I'd suggested to utilize manufacturing byproducts, with potential annual revenue of perhaps $2 million. A fraction of the aerospace division I'd built. A demotion so severe it might as well come with a paper hat and a name tag. "I appreciate your concern for my career path," I said carefully. "But before we discuss that, I'd like to understand the rationale behind yesterday's announcement. What made this the right time for Michael to step into the CEO role?" My father removed his reading glasses, a sure sign he was preparing to deliver what he considered irrefutable wisdom. "Sarah, Calloway Manufacturing has always been meant to pass from father to son. It's tradition. Your grandfather passed it to me, and now it's Michael's turn, even though I've been running it successfully for nearly a decade." "You've done exceptional work," he conceded, as if granting a great favor. "And that won't be forgotten. But Michael is a Calloway. The company bears his name. It's his birthright. His birthright. As if I, with the same Calloway blood running through my veins, somehow had a weaker claim because I'd been born with different chromosomes. "I understand," I said, rising from my chair. And I did understand. Far better than my father realized. I understood exactly what I was dealing with, and exactly what I needed to do about it. "The operations review starts in 5 minutes. Shall we head to the conference room?" My father nodded, apparently relieved that I was taking the news so well. Poor, predictable Sarah. Always reasonable, always accommodating. Little did he know that beneath my calm exterior, a storm was brewing. One that would soon engulf everything he thought he knew about his company and his children. The operations review began exactly on time, as all meetings at Calloway Manufacturing did since I'd implemented the efficiency protocols 3 years ago. The executive conference room, with its 20-foot ceilings, wall of windows overlooking the production floor, and massive table made from reclaimed factory beams, was my favorite space in the building. I'd designed it to remind everyone that, despite the modern glass exterior, we were still a company with sawdust and steel in our DNA. Today, all 14 seats around the table were filled, department heads, division directors, and our chief, officers, many of whom exchanged uncomfortable glances as my father and I entered. News traveled fast, and everyone had questions no one dared to ask. As I took my usual seat to my father's right, I noticed a new addition to our meeting. Michael slouched in a chair at the far end, scrolling through his phone, dressed in what passed for business attire in his mind: designer jeans, an untucked button-down, and loafers without socks. At 34, 2 years my junior, he still carried himself with the casual indifference of the college athlete he'd once been. before a knee injury ended his lackluster career. "Before we begin," my father announced, "I want to formally welcome Michael to the executive team. As I announced last night, he'll be taking over as CEO next month and will be shadowing Sarah through the transition period." Murmurs of half-hearted congratulations filled the room. Michael raised a hand in acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving his phone. I launched into the quarterly review without missing a beat, walking through production metrics, quality control indicators, and financial projections with the precision of someone who knew every number by heart, because I did. Our aerospace division was tracking 22% ahead of projections. Our new carbon fiber manufacturing process had reduced production time by 31%. Employee retention was at an all-time high of 94%. And looking ahead to Q3, I continued, bringing up a slide showing our pipeline. We have the final certification review for the Lockheed components next week, which should clear the way for the contract expansion we've been discussing. "What's the bottom line here?" Michael interrupted, speaking for the first time. "These numbers are impressive and all, but what's our profit margin?" I paused, surprised not by the question but by Michael's apparent interest. "Our overall margin is 28%, up from 23% this time last year. The aerospace division specifically is running at 34%. Michael nodded, making a note on his phone. "And what's industry standard?" "For advanced materials manufacturing, 18 to 22% is considered." "Excellent," David answered, shooting me a look. "We're significantly outperforming the sector." Good, Michael said, as if he'd just confirmed something he already knew, rather than learning it for the first time. The meeting continued with updates from each department. Throughout, I noticed a subtle shift in dynamics I hadn't anticipated. People were addressing their comments to Michael, seeking his reaction, explaining terms they wouldn't normally define. They were already adapting to the new power structure, positioning themselves favorably with the incoming CEO. Human nature, I supposed. Self-preservation. I couldn't blame them. As the meeting concluded, my father stood. "Excellent work, everyone. Sarah, can you walk Michael through the Lockheed certification process this afternoon? He should understand the details before next week's review." "Of course," I replied, gathering my materials. "Michael, shall we say 2 p.m. in my office?" Michael finally looked up from his phone. "Actually, I was thinking we could discuss it over lunch. The new place downtown, Elevation? I've got us a table at noon." Elevation. The trendy new restaurant with a 3-month waiting list, where tech executives and venture capitalists conducted business over $200 bottles of wine. Of course, Michael had a table. "That works," I said, though I'd been planning to use lunch to call 2 key aerospace clients and reassure them about the transition. As the room emptied, I felt a presence beside me. Raul Martinez, our chief engineering officer and one of my most valued team members. "Got a minute?" he asked quietly. I nodded, and we stepped into a small meeting room adjacent to the conference area. "Is this really happening?" Raul asked once the door closed. "Michael as CEO? The guy who needed 3 explanations of what tensile strength means?" I appreciated Raul's candor. In an industry dominated by careful corporate speak, his bluntness was refreshing. "It's happening. You built this company, Sarah. Everyone knows. It. The aerospace division was your vision when the rest of us, including your father, thought it was too risky." Raul leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I've worked at 6 manufacturing companies in my career. I've never seen a leadership change this illogical. Nepotism rarely follows logic," I said, allowing a hint of bitterness to creep into my voice. "What are you going to do?" It was the same question David had asked earlier, but coming from Raul, who had family connections throughout the aerospace industry, it carried different implications. "Right now, I'm going to ensure a smooth transition," I replied. "Beyond that, I'm exploring options." Raul nodded slowly. "Just so you know, if those options include starting fresh somewhere else, you wouldn't be going alone. Half the engineering team would follow you without a second thought. The loyalty warmed me, even as it complicated my calculations. I appreciate that, Raoul. Really. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. He tapped the doorframe twice as he left, his signature gesture, part superstition, and part habit from his days working on aircraft assembly. Just putting it out there. We're with you, whatever comes next. Alone in the meeting room, I allowed myself a moment to absorb the landscape. The company my grandfather had founded in a rented warehouse with 6 employees now occupied a 12-acre campus with state-of-the-art facilities. We employed over 200 people, many of whom had been with us for decades. Under my leadership, we'd transformed from a struggling traditional manufacturer into an industry innovator. Callaway. Manufacturing wasn't just a company, it was an ecosystem. Families depended on it. Clients built their products around our components. The local community benefited from our presence. And now, all of that was at risk because my father couldn't see past outdated notions of succession. I checked my watch, 10:45. Time to prepare for lunch with Michael. Whatever his agenda, I needed to be ready. I returned to my office, asking Melissa to reschedule my client calls and pull together the Lockheed certification files. As I sat at my desk, my gaze fell on the family photo displayed on my credenza. My grandfather Jacob, my father Richard, Michael and me at the company's 25th anniversary. My grandfather's arm was around my shoulders, his expression proud as I'd just received my MBA. My father stood next to Michael, both smiling at the camera. 5 years after that photo was taken, my grandfather passed away. His last words to me, spoken from his hospital bed. "This company will need you one day, Sarah. Be ready." I wonder if he'd seen this coming, if he'd known his son would prioritize tradition over talent, gender over merit. Either way, I was making good on my promise. To him, I would be ready. And Callaway Manufacturing, regardless of who sat in the CEO's chair, would remain in the hands of someone who truly understood what my grandfather had built. Elevation was exactly what I expected. Minimalist decor, panoramic, city views and tables spaced far enough apart to ensure discreet conversations about mergers and funding rounds. As the maitre d' led me to a corner table, I spotted Michael already seated, 2 glasses of wine poured. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the open bottle. "They have a fantastic Barolo I thought you'd appreciate." I slid into the seat, across from him. "It's a bit early for wine, don't you think?" Michael grinned, the same charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood. "Ah, come on, Sarah. We're celebrating." "Are we?" I picked up the menu instead of the wine. Glass. "I thought we were discussing the Lockheed certification process. We can do both." He leaned back, studying me. "You know, you always were the serious one. Even when we were kids." I didn't respond to the bait. Michael and I had played this game our entire lives. He, the carefree charmer, me, the responsible one. It had defined our childhood roles just as surely as our genders had now defined our professional fates. The waiter appeared, and Michael ordered for both of us without consulting me, another power move I chose to ignore. When we were alone again, I placed a folder on the table. "The Lockheed certification involves 3 phases," I began, but Michael held up a hand. "Before we get into the weeds, can we just talk? Sister to brother?" I paused, then closed the folder. "All right." Michael took a deep breath. "I know yesterday's announcement came as a shock. Dad should have handled it differently." "You think?" The words escaped before I could filter them. "I get why you're upset. You've done amazing things with the company. No one's denying that. And yet, here we are." Michael leaned forward. "Look, Sarah, you know how Dad is. The Callaway name, the Callaway legacy, it's everything to him. He was always going to choose me eventually." The candid admission stunned me. Not the content. I'd known this truth my entire life. But the fact that Michael would acknowledge it so openly. So why now? I asked. Why not 5 years ago? Or 5 years from now? Michael swirled his wine contemplatively. Honestly, I think he's worried about you. Worried about me, I repeated flatly. You're 36, Sarah. No partner, no kids, no life outside the office. When was the last time you took a vacation, or went on a date? He held up his hands defensively at my expression. I'm not judging. I'm telling you what Dad thinks. He believes he's doing you a favor. The absurdity almost made me laugh. Almost. By taking away the company I rebuilt? By forcing you to have a life? Michael's expression turned unexpectedly earnest. He sees how much you've sacrificed. He talks about it all the time. How you work harder than anyone. How you never stop. He's afraid you'll burn out with nothing to show for it but a balance sheet. Our food arrived, giving me a moment to process this revelation. Not that it changed anything, but it offered a window into my father's twisted reasoning. In his mind, he wasn't punishing me. He was saving me from myself. So his solution is to hand the company to you, I said finally. Someone who, until 18 months ago, had zero interest in manufacturing. Michael had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I know my track record isn't great, but people change, Sarah. After Quantum Leap collapsed, I did some serious soul-searching. Quantum Leap, Michael's latest failed venture, a cryptocurrency trading platform that had burned through $4 million in investor capital before spectacularly imploding. I'd reviewed the business plan when he'd first pitched it to our father. It had been fundamentally flawed from conception. And this soul-searching led you back to Callaway Manufacturing, I said skeptically. It led me to realize I've been running from my responsibilities, Michael replied. From who I really am, a Callaway. The conversation paused as Michael's phone buzzed. He checked it, typed a quick response, then returned his attention to me. Sorry, Dad checking in. Of course. My father, who had never once texted me during a business lunch, was monitoring this meeting. I shouldn't have been surprised. Michael, I said, deciding to take a different approach. Let me ask you something. What do you know about the aerospace division? He shrugged. It's our most profitable segment. High-tech materials, mostly for defense contracts. And the Lockheed certification we're supposed to be discussing. Some quality control process, right? Making sure our components meet their standards? I nodded slowly. That's a very basic summary. The actual process involves 317 individual tests across 22 material properties conducted under 6 different environmental conditions. It requires specialized knowledge of metallurgy, composite behavior, aerospace regulations, and defense contracting rules. Michael shifted uncomfortably. That's what we have engineers for. Engineers who need leadership that understands what they're doing. The last time we went through certification, I spent 3 months learning the technical specifications so I could effectively advocate for our processes during the review. A quick study, Michael protested. The certification is next week. He drained his wine glass. Sarah, I know what you're doing. You're trying to scare me into backing out. It won't work. I'm trying to make you understand the magnitude of what you're taking on, I countered. This isn't a startup where you can pivot when things get tough. We have contracts worth millions, employees who rely on us for their livelihoods, and clients whose products literally won't fly without our components. Which is why I need you, Michael said, surprising me again. I'm not stupid, Sarah. I know. I don't have your expertise or experience, but I can learn. And in the meantime, I need you to stay on. Now we were getting to it. The real purpose of this lunch. In what capacity? I asked carefully. Dad mentioned the Consumer Products Initiative, but I have something else in mind. Michael leaned forward eagerly. I want you as my COO. I stared at him. You want me to report to you? Think about it. You handle the operational details you excel at, and I focus on the big picture. the strategic vision, the future of Callaway. I almost laughed out loud. The strategic vision had been mine all along. The pivot to aerospace, the advanced materials research, the international expansion, all my initiatives, executed despite my father's initial resistance. "And David?" I asked, thinking of our current COO. Michael waved a hand dismissively. "We'll find another role for him. Something in finance, maybe." Just like that. Reshuffling executives like playing cards with no regard for expertise or institutional knowledge. It was exactly the kind of facile decision-making I'd expected. I needed to end this lunch before I said something I couldn't take back. "I'll consider it," I lied, closing the folder I'd brought. "But right now, I should get back to the office. I have a call with the Lockheed team at 2. Michael signaled for the check. "I meant what I said, Sarah. I want us to work together. To keep Callaway Manufacturing in the family where it belongs." As he signed the credit card slip, company expense account naturally, I studied my brother. Despite everything, I didn't hate him. Michael had always been exactly what our father raised him to be: entitled, overly confident, and convinced of his own importance despite evidence to the contrary. In many ways, he was as much a victim of our father's outdated values as I was. The difference was, those values benefited him. As we walked out of the restaurant, Michael placed a hand on my shoulder. "Think about the COO position. It could be the perfect solution for everyone." I smiled tightly. "I'll let you know my decision soon. Very soon, in fact." Because while Michael had been busy enjoying his wine and outlining his grand plans, I'd been mentally finalizing mine. Project Phoenix was about to take flight. Instead of returning to the office after lunch, I directed my driver to take me to the original Callaway Manufacturing building on the outskirts of town. The old brick structure still housed our research and development department. My choice, as the separation from main operations gave the engineers freedom to experiment without disrupting production workflows. I found Elaine Winters, our R&D director, hunched over a prototype, her gray hair escaping from a messy bun. At 62, Elaine had been with the company since my grandfather's days. She was brilliant, uncompromising, and one of the few people who had never underestimated me because of my gender. "Didn't expect to see you here today," she said, straightening up. "Thought you'd be dealing with the fallout from Richard's little bombshell." "That's exactly what I'm doing," I replied. "I need to show you something." I led her to the small office I maintained in the building, little more than a desk and some filing cabinets, but it had served as my thinking space during crucial moments in the company's transformation. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet and pulled out a battered leather portfolio. "Remember this?" I asked, placing it on the desk. Elaine adjusted her glasses. "The Advanced Materials Proposal. From what? 2017? When Richard was convinced we'd go under if we didn't slash R&D by 70%. I nodded, opening the portfolio. Inside were the original sketches, calculations, and market analyses that had eventually become our aerospace division, the division that now generated 65% of our revenue. "Do you remember what my father said when I presented this to him?" Elaine snorted. "Metal parts were good enough for my father, and they're good enough for us." Stubborn old goat. The memory still stung, even years later. I'd spent months researching advanced materials, identifying market opportunities, calculating costs and potential returns. I'd created a comprehensive 5-year plan for transforming our outdated manufacturing processes without laying off a single employee, and my father had dismissed it without even reading past the executive summary. "What he doesn't remember," I said, flipping through the pages, "is what happened next." Elaine's eyes twinkled. "You went rogue." It had been the pivotal moment of my career. Instead of accepting my father's rejection, I'd used my authority as VP of Operations to reallocate resources, creating a skunkworks team to develop the first prototypes. I'd convinced 3 key engineers to work evenings and weekends, promising bonuses from my own salary if we succeeded. I'd leveraged personal connections from business school to secure our first aerospace client. A small contract, but enough to prove the concept. 6 months later, I'd presented my father not with a proposal, but with results. A working prototype, a signed contract, and projected revenue that would save the company from the cost-cutting measures he'd been planning. He called it a risky gamble that happened to pay off, I recalled, closing the portfolio. Never admitted I was right from the beginning. But he let you run with it, Elaine pointed out. And look where we are now. Where we were now was a company transformed. The pages in the portfolio told the story. The initial carbon composite, development, the expansion into ceramics and specialized polymers, the proprietary manufacturing processes we'd patented, the gradual shift from commodity metal parts to high-value aerospace components. Year by year, decision by decision, I'd rebuilt Callaway Manufacturing from a struggling legacy business into an industry leader. Remember the Miller contract? I asked, pulling out another file. Elaine groaned. How could I forget? 6 months of 18-hour days, redesigning components on the fly when their specs kept changing. But we delivered, I said, scanning the notes from that period. On time, on budget, exceeding their performance requirements. Because you were in the trenches with us, Elaine said. You learned enough materials science to challenge our engineers, enough about aerospace regulations to navigate the certification process. You weren't just a suit in the corner office. I smiled at her characteristic bluntness. And now my father wants to replace me with exactly that. A suit who doesn't know a composite from a thermoplastic. Elaine removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. Sarah, why are we taking this trip down memory lane? You know I've always backed you, but Richard's made his decision. And from what I hear, Michael's offering you the COO position. News traveled fast. I'm not taking it. Then what? You're leaving. Alarm flashed across her features. Half our aerospace clients work with us because of their relationship with you. I'm not leaving either, I said, pulling out a final document from the portfolio, a yellowish paper, with my grandfather's handwriting. Do you know what this is? Elaine squinted at it. Looks like the original company charter. Not just the charter. The ownership structure when my grandfather incorporated Callaway Manufacturing. I pointed to a specific paragraph. Read this section. Elaine took the paper, reading carefully. Upon the founder's retirement or death, controlling interest shall be divided equally among all direct descendants who have worked in the business for a minimum of 5 years, regardless of gender or birth order. She looked up, eyes wide. Your grandfather specifically included regardless of gender? In 1988? My grandmother helped start the company, I explained. She didn't get official recognition because of the times, but my grandfather never forgot her contribution. He made sure the charter protected any granddaughters as well as grandsons. Does Richard know about this? I shook my head. The charter was updated when my father took over. He created the current ownership structure, with him holding 51%. But he never formally dissolved the original corporation. It still exists as a holding company that owns a significant portion of today's Callaway Manufacturing. And you're a direct descendant who's worked here more than 5 years, Elaine said, beginning to understand. So, according to the original charter, I'm entitled to an equal share of the founding corporation's holdings, I confirmed. I've had the attorneys reviewing it for the past month. They've confirmed it's legally binding. A month? Elaine's eyebrows shot up. You knew this was coming? I sighed, gathering the documents. I suspected. Dad's been bringing Michael to more meetings, introducing him to key clients. And last month, he asked me to compile a complete overview of all operations, contracts, and strategic initiatives for the board's review. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. So, what now? I carefully returned the portfolio to the filing cabinet. Now, I finish what I started. The transformation of Callaway Manufacturing doesn't end with aerospace components. I've been developing the next phase for over a year. The integrated systems approach? Elaine guessed. We'd discussed it conceptually, moving beyond providing components to designing entire subsystems for our aerospace clients, a shift that would potentially double our value proposition. That's part of it. I stood, feeling more centered than I had since yesterday's announcement. I'd like you in the executive meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring the prototype for the thermal management system. Elaine nodded, though confusion still clouded her features. Sarah, you're not telling me everything. No, I agreed, heading for the door. I'm not. But by this time tomorrow, everyone will understand exactly what I've been building all these years, and why no one's going to take it from me. As I walked through the old factory floor, now filled with cutting-edge equipment and engineers developing the next generation of materials, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced since that long-ago moment when I'd decided to go against my father's wishes and pursue the aerospace opportunity. Once again, I was at a crossroads. Once again, I was choosing the path that honored not just the Callaway name, but what that name truly stood for: innovation, excellence, and the courage to evolve. My grandfather had built this company from nothing. My father had maintained it through changing times, and I had transformed it into something greater than either of them had imagined. Michael might have the family name. He might have my father's blessing. But I had built Callaway Manufacturing into what it was today, and I was prepared to fight for what I'd built. That evening, I returned to my penthouse earlier than usual, just as the sun was setting over the coastline. I kicked off my heels, a ritual that normally signaled the transition from CEO to simply Sarah. Tonight, though, the boundary between professional and personal felt meaningless. When your family is your business, the two are inextricably linked. I poured myself a glass of the 25-year-old scotch I'd been saving for a special occasion. This wasn't the celebration I'd anticipated, but it felt fitting nonetheless. Standing at my wall of windows, I raised the glass in a silent toast to the city lights flickering to life below. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder: Mom's birthday dinner, 7:30 p.m. I'd completely forgotten. For a moment, I considered canceling. The thought of sitting across from my father and brother, making polite conversation while pretending yesterday hadn't happened, made my stomach turn. But disappointing my mother on her birthday wasn't an option. She'd been caught in the crossfire of Callaway family dynamics her entire married life. She didn't deserve to have her celebration tainted by our power struggles. I changed into a simple black dress, reapplied my makeup, and headed back out, instructing my driver to stop for flowers on the way. My parents' home, the house I'd grown up in, was a Tudor-style mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The house my father had purchased when Callaway Manufacturing had its first $1 million year, determined to showcase his success to the world. As I walked up the familiar stone path, carrying a bouquet of my mother's favorite lilies, I mentally prepared myself. Tonight wasn't about business or succession or my father's betrayal. Tonight was about my mother, Eleanor Callaway, who had somehow maintained her grace and kindness despite decades of navigating the challenging personalities of Callaway men. Michael's BMW was already in the driveway, of course. He was never late for family occasions, one of the few responsibilities he took seriously. I rang the doorbell, and my mother opened it herself, despite the housekeeper hovering nearby. Sarah! She embraced me, the scent of her signature perfume, bringing a rush of childhood memories. At 60, Eleanor Callaway remained striking, tall and slender with silver-streaked dark hair cut into a stylish bob. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wouldn't miss your birthday, I said, handing her the flowers. Happy birthday, Mom. She accepted them with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thank you, dear. Come in. Your father and Michael are already in the dining room. The house looked exactly as it always had, meticulously decorated in traditional style. Family photos arranged precisely on mahogany tables. Nothing out of place. My mother had always treated the house like a stage set, ready for unexpected visitors who might judge our family's success by our surroundings. "There she is," my father called as I entered the dining room, his tone jarringly normal, as if yesterday's announcement had never happened. He stood at the head of the table, carving knife in hand, preparing to serve the roast that was our family's traditional celebration meal. Just in time, Michael sat at his right, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up, offering a brief smile. "Hey, sis." "Richard, no phones at dinner," my mother chided gently, placing the lilies in a vase the housekeeper had prepared. "Sarah, sit here next to me." I took my assigned seat, accepting the glass of wine my father poured. "To Eleanor," he said, raising his glass. "Happy birthday to the woman who's kept us all sane for 40 years. We clinked glasses, the picture of a happy, functional family. Anyone observing would never guess the currents running beneath the surface. Dinner proceeded with carefully neutral conversation. My mother's charity work, a neighbor's renovation project, an upcoming exhibit at the art museum. It wasn't until dessert, my mother's favorite chocolate torte, that Michael broke the unspoken pact to avoid business talk. "So, Sarah," he said, setting down his fork, "have you thought any more about my offer?" My mother looked between us, confusion evident. "Offer?" "I've asked Sarah to stay on as COO," Michael explained, "working directly with me through the transition and beyond." "Oh," my mother brightened. "That sounds like a wonderful solution. Don't you think so, Sarah?" Before I could respond, my father interjected. "It's a generous offer. Most incoming CEOs would clean house entirely." The implication that Michael was doing me a favor by allowing me to keep any role at all hung in the air. I took a slow sip of wine, buying time to control my response. "I'm still considering my options," I said finally. "What options?" My father's voice sharpened. "This is the family company, Sarah. Where else would you go?" It was the opening I'd been waiting for, but I hesitated. Did I really want to have this conversation now during my mother's birthday dinner? My mother reached over, placing her hand on mine. "Perhaps this isn't the best time to discuss business matters." "No, it's all right," I said, squeezing her hand, reassuringly before letting go. "Dad's right. Callaway Manufacturing is the family company, which is exactly why I'm struggling with his decision." My father set down his wine glass with deliberate care. "The decision is made, Sarah." "Based on what criteria?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Michael has been with the company for 18 months. I've dedicated 8 years to rebuilding it, from near bankruptcy to industry leadership." "Sarah," Michael began, but I cut him off. "No, let's be honest for once. This isn't about qualifications or results or what's best for the company. This is about gender. If I were your son instead of your daughter, we wouldn't be having this conversation." My father's face flushed. "That's not fair. Isn't it? You've never given me a single reason why Michael is better qualified to lead Callaway Manufacturing." "Because there isn't one." "It's not about qualifications," my father said, his voice rising. "It's about legacy, about tradition." "Outdated tradition," I countered. "Grandfather wouldn't have made this choice." My father scoffed. "You can't possibly know what my father would have done." "Actually, I do." I reached for my purse, withdrawing a folded copy of the original company charter I'd shown Elaine earlier. "Did you know Grandfather specifically included language ensuring equal treatment of all descendants, regardless of gender?" My father stared at the document I slid across the table, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" "It was in his old files at the R&D building. The original charter makes it clear that he intended for all qualified descendants to have an equal opportunity to lead." My mother intervened, her voice gentle but firm. "Please, Can we not do this tonight? It's my birthday. The reminder triggered an immediate wave of guilt. I folded the document, returning it to my purse. You're right, Mom, I'm sorry. An uncomfortable silence descended on the table, broken only when the housekeeper entered to clear the dessert plates. My mother, ever the gracious hostess, suggested we move to the living room for coffee. As we stood, my father pulled me aside, his voice low. We'll discuss this tomorrow in my office. 8 a.m. I nodded, then moved to help my mother carry coffee cups. As I arranged them on the living room's silver tray, she touched my arm. You've sacrificed so much for the company, Sarah, she said quietly. Your father doesn't see it, but I do. The missed holidays, the relationships that never had a chance to develop, the personal milestones delayed or forgotten. I swallowed. Hard. My mother rarely acknowledged the gender dynamics that had shaped our family. I was proud of my work, I said simply. I know, and you should be. She adjusted a cup with precision. But sometimes I wonder if your grandfather would have wanted his company to cost you everything else. Her words struck deeper than she could know. Had I sacrificed too much? The question had haunted my quiet moments for years. The engagement. Broken because I consistently prioritized work emergencies, the friendships that faded when I canceled plans once too often. The perpetually postponed dreams of travel, hobbies, perhaps even children someday. But those had been my choices, made with clear eyes and full awareness of the consequences. I had wanted to prove myself, to build something meaningful, to earn my place through merit rather than birth, and I had succeeded. Callaway Manufacturing stood as testament to those sacrifices. The question now was whether I was willing to sacrifice the company itself, to walk away rather than fight for what I'd built. As I carried the coffee tray into the living room, where Michael was showing our father something on his phone and both were laughing, I knew my answer. Some sacrifices were necessary. Some were not, and I would no longer sacrifice my future for traditions that had never valued me to begin with. I arrived at Callaway Manufacturing headquarters at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, well before my scheduled meeting with my father. The building was quiet, with only the security staff and a few early rising engineers present. I needed this time to prepare, to review documents, and most importantly, to center myself for what promised to be a pivotal confrontation. As I settled at my desk, a notification pinged on my computer. An email from Preston Holdings, one of our largest aerospace clients, marked urgent. I opened it immediately, my heart sinking as I read, Ms. Callaway. It has come to our attention that Callaway Manufacturing is undergoing a leadership transition. Given the critical nature of the components you supply for our J87X program, we would like to schedule an immediate review meeting to discuss continuity plans and evaluate whether our current agreements require reassessment. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Regards, Lawrence Preston. This was exactly what I'd feared. News of Michael's appointment had reached our clients, and they were understandably concerned. Preston Holdings alone represented nearly $12 million in annual contracts. If they pulled out, others would follow. Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang. It was Melissa, my assistant, who rarely called this early. Sarah, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. There's a situation developing. What kind of situation? I asked, already mentally calculating how many more problems I could handle before my 8 a.m. meeting. Michael is in the production facility giving some kind of tour to people I don't recognize. They're taking photos of the aerospace manufacturing line. I sat up straighter. He's what? Who authorized that? I don't know, Melissa said, her voice betraying her anxiety. Security called me because they couldn't reach you. They said Michael told them it was pre-approved by the executive team. It absolutely was not pre-approved. Our aerospace production facility contained proprietary processes and equipment that were protected by strict confidentiality agreements. No photography was allowed, and outside visitors required security clearance weeks in advance. "I'll handle it," I said, already heading for the door. "Tell security I'm on my way." The manufacturing floor was located in a separate building, connected to the main offices by a covered walkway. I moved quickly, my mind racing. What was Michael thinking? Who were these people? The possibilities, none of them good, multiplied with each step. I swiped my badge at the security entrance and pushed through the doors to the aerospace production area. The facility was impressive. A vast space filled with specialized equipment, robotic systems, and climate-controlled sections for handling sensitive materials. Normally, the floor would be buzzing with activity as the first shift began their work. Today, operations appeared to have been temporarily halted. At the far end of the floor, I spotted Michael with 3 men in business suits standing near. Our newest carbon composite forming machine, a piece of equipment that had cost over $2 million and used a manufacturing process we'd developed and patented. One of the men was taking photos with a professional camera. "Excuse me," I called out, striding toward them with purpose. "This is a restricted area. Photography is strictly prohibited." Michael turned, surprise quickly morphing into annoyance. "Sarah, I didn't expect you in so early." "Clearly," I replied, turning to the visitors. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to stop taking photographs immediately. Security will need to review any images you've already captured." The photographer lowered his camera, looking to Michael for guidance. The oldest man in the group, silver-haired and expensively dressed, stepped forward with an extended hand. "Ms. Calloway, I presume? Victor Harrington, CEO of Meridian Aerospace. Your brother has been giving us an impressive tour of your facilities. Meridian Aerospace, one of our biggest competitors, and a company that had been trying to poach our aerospace clients for years." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach as I shook his hand automatically. "Mr. Harrington, this is unexpected. We typically schedule visits from other industry executives well in advance, with appropriate non-disclosure agreements in place." "Oh, we've signed the paperwork," he assured me, though his easy smile didn't reach his eyes. Michael had it all prepared. Very efficient, your brother. I glanced at Michael, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "Would you excuse us for just a moment?" I asked Harrington, maintaining my professional smile. "Michael, a word, please." I led my brother several yards away, positioning us behind a large piece of equipment where we wouldn't be overheard. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded in a fierce whisper. "Meridian Aerospace, our direct competitor, in our production facility, taking photos of proprietary technology?" Michael seemed genuinely confused by my anger. "It's a potential partnership opportunity. Harrington reached out yesterday after hearing about my appointment." "And you didn't think that was suspicious? That within hours of learning you were taking over, a competitor suddenly wants a tour of our most advanced production line?" "They're interested in a joint venture," Michael explained, as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "They have distribution channels in markets we haven't penetrated." "Because they're our competitors," I hissed. "They don't want a partnership, Michael. They want our technology and our client list, which you're handing them on a silver platter." His expression hardened. "You don't know that. You're jumping to conclusions because you're angry about the succession announcement. This has nothing to do with succession and everything to do with protecting the company. What NDAs did they sign? Did legal review them? Did you limit what areas they could access?" Michael's slight hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "Jesus, Michael. They're conducting industrial espionage, and you're giving them a guided tour?" "You're overreacting," he insisted. "Harrington is a respected industry figure who's been trying to undercut our aerospace contracts for 3 years. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell them there's been a misunderstanding, and the tour needs to end immediately. Security will escort them out and confiscate any photos or notes they've taken. Then you and I are going to have a serious conversation about protocol." "You don't give me orders, Sarah." Michael said, his voice low. In case you've forgotten, I'm going to be CEO in 3 weeks. And in case you've forgotten, you're currently not the CEO. I am. And I'm telling you this tour ends now, before you compromise our intellectual property and violate about a dozen confidentiality agreements with our actual clients. We stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Michael shook his head. Fine, have it your way. But you're making a mistake. Harrington could have been a valuable contact. He's a valuable contact who's currently standing next to our proprietary carbon composite former, probably memorizing its specifications, I pointed out. Now go end this, before I call security and have them all removed, including you. As Michael walked back to the visitors, I pulled out my phone and texted David Chen. Emergency meeting in my office, 7:15 a.m. Potential security breach in aerospace. Production. I watched as Michael spoke to Harrington, whose affable expression gradually morphed into something cooler and more calculating. The photographer handed over his camera to a security officer who had materialized at my silent signal. This wasn't just an innocent mistake. It was a catastrophic lapse in judgment that could have cost us millions in intellectual property. And it was just the beginning of the complications Michael's appointment would create. By the time I returned to the main building, the email from Preston Holdings had been joined by 2 more from different clients, all expressing similar concerns about the leadership transition. The situation was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. My carefully constructed plans for a measured response to my father's decision were being overtaken by immediate threats to the company's stability. As I entered my office, where David was already waiting, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't wait any longer to implement Project Phoenix. The future of Callaway Manufacturing, and everything I'd built, depended on it. He did what? David's face registered disbelief as I recounted the scene on the manufacturing floor. Gave Meridian Aerospace a personal tour of our proprietary production line, I repeated, pacing my office. Complete with photography. David ran a hand through his hair. I don't even have words. Did they see the new thermal management prototype? I don't think so. It's still in the secure development area. But they saw enough. I checked my watch. 7:25 a.m. We need damage control immediately. Call legal and have them prepare cease and desist letters regarding any information obtained during the visit. Contact our primary aerospace clients. Assure them our security protocols remain in place despite this incident. David nodded, making notes. What about your father? Does he know? Not yet. I'm meeting him at 8. I stopped pacing, turning to face David directly. It's time for Plan B. His eyebrows shot up. Already? I thought we were holding that as a last resort. This is a last resort, I said, pulling a USB drive from my desk drawer. Michael's little tour just demonstrated he's not just unqualified. He's actively dangerous to the company's future. We can't wait 3 weeks for the official transition. The emergency response plan we'd created had included several contingencies, from my accepting the COO position under protest to my potential departure from the company. Plan B was the most aggressive option, one I'd hoped to avoid. Are you sure? David asked, his expression serious. Once you do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your father, with Michael. This isn't about family relationships anymore, I said firmly. It's about protecting Callaway Manufacturing, the company, the employees, the clients who depend on us. Michael just invited our biggest competitor to examine proprietary technology that took us years and millions to develop. David nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Have the board packet ready for immediate distribution, and tell Elaine to bring the thermal management prototype to the executive conference room at 9 instead of my office. As David left to execute these tasks, I sat at my desk and opened the original company charter again. My grandfather's vision had been progressive for his time: equal opportunity regardless of gender, shared governance among qualified family members, protection for the company's long-term interests over individual control. My father had systematically dismantled those principles, restructuring the company to consolidate his own power. And now he was prepared to sacrifice everything we'd built on the altar of outdated patriarchal tradition. At 7:55, I gathered my materials and headed to my father's office. His assistant, Marion, who had worked for him for over 20 years, gave me a sympathetic smile as I passed. News of the morning's events had clearly spread. "He's waiting for you," she said softly. I thanked her and pushed open the heavy oak door. My father sat behind his massive desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some document. Michael sat in one of the visitor chairs, his posture defensive. So this was to be 2 against 1. I shouldn't have been surprised. "Sarah," my father said, removing his glasses, "I understand there was some confusion this morning regarding visitors to the production facility." Confusion. What a convenient euphemism for a massive security breach. If by confusion you mean that Michael authorized competitors to photograph our proprietary manufacturing processes without proper clearance or NDAs, then yes, there was confusion. I remained standing, despite the empty chair beside Michael. A confusion that has already resulted in 3 clients contacting me with concerns about our security protocols. My father frowned. Michael was exploring potential partnership opportunities. That's what leaders do. They build relationships. Leaders also protect intellectual property and honor confidentiality agreements with existing clients, I countered. The visitors this morning were not potential partners. They were competitors who have been actively trying to reverse engineer our aerospace components for years. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "You're exaggerating the situation. Harrington was interested in possible collaboration?" "Harrington was interested in our manufacturing process," I cut in. "A process that gives us a competitive advantage worth millions, an advantage you were giving away for free." My father held up a hand. "Enough. What's done is done. Security confiscated any photos taken. There was no harm done. No harm except for the 3 clients already questioning our reliability. No harm except for the proprietary methods now in the memory of our biggest competitor. But arguing these points would get us nowhere." "I didn't come here to debate this morning's security breach," I said, changing tactics. "I came to discuss the succession plan." My father leaned back in his chair. "As I told you last night, the decision is final. Michael will become CEO at the end of the month. You've been offered the COO position, which is more than generous considering the circumstances." "What circumstances would those be?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "The circumstances of a family business," my father replied, as if explaining to a child. "Callaway Manufacturing has always passed from father to son. That's our tradition. A tradition that contradicts the company's founding principles," I said, placing the copy of the original charter on his desk. "As I mentioned last night, grandfather specifically ensured equal opportunity for all his descendants, regardless of gender." My father barely glanced at the document. "That charter was superseded when I reorganized the company in 1999. The current corporate structure gives me controlling interest and the authority to name my successor." "The reorganization created a new operating entity," I agreed. "But the original corporation still exists as a holding company that owns 27% of Callaway Manufacturing. And according to its charter, I'm entitled to equal control of that holding company." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across my father's face. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. As a direct descendant who has worked in the business for more than 5 years, I have equal right to the founding shares. Shares that were never properly distributed according to the charter's succession plan." Michael leaned forward. "What does this have to do with anything? Dad owns 51% of the company. He can appoint whoever he wants as CEO. Dad owns 51% of the operating company, I corrected. But the holding company that controls 27% of those shares has its own governance rules. Rules that were never formally changed. Rules that give me equal say in how those shares are voted. My father's expression darkened as he began to understand the implications. You're threatening a legal challenge over control of the holding company? I'm not threatening anything, I said evenly. I've already filed the paperwork. My attorneys submitted it yesterday afternoon. The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not as his daughter, not as his temporary stand-in, but as an opponent he had severely underestimated. You would sue your own family? Michael asked, incredulous. I'm protecting the company our grandfather built, I replied, not taking my eyes off my father. A company that today faces 3 client concerns, 1 security breach, and the prospect of a CEO who doesn't understand the most basic principles of our industry. All before 8 a.m. My father stood slowly, his hands flat on the desk. This is a mistake, Sarah. Even if you have some technical legal claim, which I doubt, fighting this in court would damage the company far more than any transition issues. I agree, I said, surprising them both. Which is why I've prepared an alternative solution. I reached into my portfolio and withdrew a second document. A new corporate structure that honors grandfather's original intent while addressing our current reality. I placed the proposal on the desk beside the charter. The board meets in 1 hour. I'll be presenting this restructuring plan for their approval. I wanted to give you the courtesy of seeing it first. As my father picked up the document, his face transitioning from shock to anger, I turned to leave. At the door, I paused. One final thing. I've scheduled an all-hands meeting for 11. I'll be addressing the company about our path forward. I hope you'll both be there. Without waiting for a response, I walked out, closing the door firmly. Behind me. In the outer office, Marion looked up, concern evident in her expression. Everything all right, Ms. Calloway? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in days. Everything is exactly as it should be, Marion. Change is coming to Calloway. Manufacturing, just not the change my father anticipated. I had approximately 45 minutes before the board meeting, not enough time to second-guess my decision, thankfully. As I walked back to my office, I felt strangely calm. The die was cast. After 8 years of respecting my father's authority, of working within his constraints, of proving myself over and over only to be dismissed, I had finally taken matters into my own hands. David was waiting in my office, along with Elaine and Raoul. My core team, the people who had been instrumental in Calloway Manufacturing's transformation. How did it go? David asked, rising from his chair. About as expected, I replied, setting my portfolio on the desk. Shock, then anger, then threats about damaging the company. I left them with the restructuring proposal. Elaine snorted. Richard never could handle being outmaneuvered. What's your read? Will he fight it? I considered the question as I took my seat. He'll try, but the legal foundation is solid. And more importantly, we have the business case on our side. 3 client concerns this morning alone, plus the security. Breach, the board can't ignore those. Raoul leaned forward. The engineering team is behind you. We had an informal meeting after word spread about the Meridian Aerospace visit. No one wants to work for a CEO who doesn't understand basic IP protection. I nodded, grateful for the support, but aware of the complexities still ahead. This isn't going to be clean or easy. We're challenging not just my father's decision, but his entire worldview. He genuinely believes the company should pass to his son, regardless of qualifications. And Michael? David asked. Where does he stand in all this? It was a good question. Despite everything, I didn't believe Michael was malicious, just entitled and woefully unprepared. Michael is following the path that was laid out for him. He's never had to fight for anything, never had to prove himself. Why would he question a system designed for his benefit? I glanced at my watch. 8:25. Elaine, is the thermal management prototype ready for the demonstration? She nodded. Set? Up in the conference room. It's impressive, Sarah. The board will understand immediately why it's a game changer. Good. Because we're not just fighting for control today, we're fighting for the future direction of Callaway Manufacturing. I took a deep breath. The aerospace division was only phase 1. The integrated systems approach is where the real growth potential lies. We're ready to evolve from components supplier to full subsystems partner. It was the vision I'd been developing for the past 18 months, a comprehensive strategy to double our value and secure our position at the forefront of the industry. A vision that required deep understanding of aerospace engineering, manufacturing processes, and client needs. A vision Michael could never execute. The board packet has been distributed, David confirmed. Financial projections, market analysis, client testimonials, everything to support both the restructuring and the strategic pivot. I nodded, feeling a moment of gratitude for these allies who understood what was at stake. Then I think we're as ready as we'll ever be. Let's head to the conference room. As we gathered our materials, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Your father just called. What's happening, Sarah? I hesitated, then typed a quick response. Protecting grandfather's legacy. I'll explain everything later. We walked to the executive conference room, where Elaine's team had set up the thermal management system prototype, a revolutionary design that would allow aerospace clients to integrate our components directly into their systems, reducing weight, improving performance, and dramatically increasing our profit margins. The board members were already arriving, 8 men and 2 women, most of them old family friends or business associates of my father. People who had known me since childhood, who had watched me grow up, graduate, and eventually take the reins of the company. Would that personal connection help or hurt my case today? Before I could dwell on the question, the door opened, and my father strode in, Michael trailing behind him. The tension in the room immediately ratcheted up several notches. My father's face was a mask of controlled anger, his posture rigid as he took his seat at the head of the table. Ladies and gentlemen, he began without preamble. I've called this emergency meeting to address a situation that has developed. My daughter Sarah has initiated legal action regarding the holding company that owns a portion of Callaway Manufacturing shares. Several board members exchanged confused glances. This was not how I had planned to begin the meeting, but I should have expected my father to try seizing control of the narrative. That's correct, I said, keeping my voice level. Though I would characterize it not as legal action, but as a formal recognition of the original company charter's provisions regarding succession and share distribution. I passed copies of the charter to each board member. As you can see, the founding document of Callaway Manufacturing, drafted by my grandfather, Jacob Callaway, specifically ensures equal treatment of all direct descendants who have worked in the business for 5 years or more, regardless of gender. This is a technicality, my father interjected. The company was reorganized in 1999. The operating entity was reorganized, I corrected. But the holding company that controls 27% of our shares maintains its original charter, a charter that entitled me to equal control of those shares upon meeting the 5-year employment requirement, a milestone I passed 3 years ago. I could see the board members processing this information, some with surprise, others with growing understanding. Lawrence Peterson, the longest-serving board member and a contemporary of my grandfather, spoke first. Richard, is this accurate? The original charter was never formally superseded for the holding company. My father's hesitation spoke volumes. There may be some administrative oversights in how the transition was documented, but the intent was clear. The company passes to my son. Intent doesn't override legal documents, said Diane Ramos, one of the 2 female board members and a former corporate attorney. If the charter specified equal treatment regardless of gender, and that provision was never formally amended, Sarah has a legitimate claim. This isn't just about legal technicalities, I said, bringing the focus back to the core issue. It's about what's best for Callaway Manufacturing. This morning alone, 3 major aerospace clients have contacted me with concerns about the announced leadership transition, and we experienced a serious security breach when unauthorized visitors were allowed to photograph proprietary manufacturing processes. Several board members straightened in their chairs, alarmed. "What security breach?" Peterson demanded. Before my father could intervene, I outlined the Meridian Aerospace incident in clinical detail. I didn't name Michael directly, but there was no need. Everyone in the room understood who had authorized the visit. This is exactly why leadership requires more than a family name, I continued. It requires experience, industry knowledge, and an understanding of our business fundamentals. Qualities I've demonstrated over 8 years of successful leadership. I gestured to the prototype at the side of the room. But this meeting isn't just about who sits in the CEO's office. It's about where Callaway Manufacturing goes next. I'd like to present our new thermal management system and the integrated approach it represents, the next phase in our company's evolution. As Elaine stepped forward to begin the demonstration, I caught my father's eye across the table. Beneath his anger, I recognized something else. A grudging respect, perhaps. Or at least the recognition that he had underestimated me for the last time. The battle for Callaway Manufacturing had begun in earnest, and I intended to win. Elaine's demonstration of the thermal management system was flawless. As she explained the technical innovations and market applications, I watched the board members' expressions shift from polite interest to genuine engagement. Even my father leaned forward when she highlighted the potential revenue projections. A 40% increase in our aerospace division's profitability within 18 months. The key advantage, Elaine concluded, is that this isn't just a better component. It's a comprehensive subsystem that integrates with our clients' designs at a much earlier stage. We become partners in their development process, not just suppliers of parts. And we've already secured provisional patents on 3 aspects of the design, I added, creating a significant competitive moat that will be difficult for companies like Meridian to overcome. The mention of Meridian brought the conversation back to the morning's security breach. Lawrence Peterson turned to my father. "Richard, this situation is concerning. How do you respond to Sarah's points about client concerns and security protocols?" My father cleared his throat. Today's incident was unfortunate, but contained. As for client concerns, they're natural during any leadership transition. Michael is more than capable of addressing them. "I'd like to speak to that," Michael interjected, surprising me. He had been unusually quiet throughout the meeting. I acknowledged that I made a mistake this morning. I was eager to explore potential partnerships and move too quickly, without following established protocols. It was an unexpectedly mature admission. Michael continued. "However, I believe this demonstrates precisely why Sarah's proposed restructuring makes sense. Her expertise with our aerospace clients and technical processes complements my external relationship-building skills. Together, we could lead Callaway Manufacturing more effectively than either of us alone." I blinked, caught off guard by this apparent pivot. Was Michael actually supporting my proposal? I glanced at the document in front of the board members, the restructuring plan I'd developed as my Plan B. The proposal outlined a dual leadership structure, myself as CEO and President of Aerospace Systems, our core business, with Michael as President of Business Development and New Ventures, a newly created division focused on expanding our market presence. Both roles would report to a newly established executive chair position, which I had left unnamed in the document. My father, who had clearly read the proposal during the demonstration, finally spoke. This arrangement would divide the company. Callaway Manufacturing has always had clear, singular leadership. Actually, Lawrence Peterson interjected, Jacob ran the company with a partnership model in its early days. He and Thomas Wheeler effectively served as co-leaders, with Jacob handling operations and Thomas managing client relationships. It was quite effective. This historical perspective seemed to catch my father off guard. He had always presented his father as a singular, autocratic leader, a narrative that justified his own leadership style. Diane Ramos tapped the restructuring proposal. I see potential here. The aerospace division requires deep technical knowledge and established client relationships, Sarah's strengths. The business development role leverages different skills, networking, relationship building, market expansion, which align with Michael's background. Other board members began to nod, warming to the concept. The dual leadership structure addressed multiple concerns simultaneously. It respected the family succession tradition while acknowledging merit and expertise. It maintained continuity with aerospace clients while creating growth opportunities. It offered a compromise that could avoid potentially damaging legal battles. My father, sensing the shift in the room, attempted to regain control. If the board is considering this approach, there would need to be a clear hierarchy. As executive chair, I would have final authority over major decisions. And there it was, his countermove. Accept the restructuring, but position himself above both Michael and me, maintaining ultimate control. I had anticipated this possibility. The executive chair role requires board approval and would have clearly defined parameters, I noted. It's a governance position, not an operational one, ensuring the company's long-term strategic direction while allowing the respective presidents to manage their divisions. The discussion continued for another hour, delving into the specifics of the restructuring. Throughout, I maintained my composure, addressing each concern with fact-based responses, referring to performance metrics and client feedback rather than emotions or personal claims. Finally, Lawrence Peterson called for a preliminary vote to determine whether the board supported the restructuring concept in principle, with details to be finalized in a subsequent meeting. Those in favor of exploring the dual leadership structure as outlined in Sarah's proposal, with appropriate governance mechanisms to be determined. 8 hands raised, a clear majority. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Then I believe we have a path forward, Peterson concluded. Richard, Sarah, Michael, I suggest the 3 of you develop a detailed transition plan for board review next week. In the meantime, Sarah will continue as CEO, with all current authorities intact. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out, many stopping to examine the thermal management prototype more closely. My father remained seated, staring at the restructuring document. You've been planning this for some time, he said when we were alone, his voice oddly quiet. I've been preparing for contingencies, I corrected. After 12 years in business, I've learned that hope is not a strategy. He looked up, and for a brief moment, I glimpsed something like pride in his expression, before it vanished behind his usual reserve. You're more like my father than I realized. It was perhaps the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given me. Before I could respond, Michael approached, his expression unreadable. Smart proposal, he said, nodding toward the document. You could have pushed for complete control, but you created a role for me. The company needs both sets of skills, I replied carefully, and despite everything, we're still family. Michael studied me for a moment. You really believe I could contribute something valuable, don't you? I believe you have potential you've never fully explored, I said honestly. The question is whether you're willing to earn your place rather than expecting it as a birthright. He seemed to consider this, then extended his hand. I guess we'll find out. Partners? I hesitated only briefly before shaking his hand. We'll see. As they left the conference room, David approached from where he'd been waiting by the door. That went better than expected, he observed. Your father didn't explode. Michael actually supported the concept, and the board backed you overwhelmingly. It's just the beginning, I cautioned. My father won't relinquish control easily, and Michael's sudden cooperation seems convenient. You don't trust either of them, David noted. It wasn't a question. I trust that my father will always do what he believes is best for the Callaway legacy, I replied. And I trust that Michael will always look out for Michael. Neither of those priorities necessarily aligns with what's best for the company. I gathered my notes and headed for the door. Which is why we need to be prepared for their next move. Have legal start drafting the formal executive chair parameters. Strict. Limitations on operational interference. Clear division of authorities. And schedule the all-hands meeting as planned. It's time everyone understands where Callaway Manufacturing is headed. The company-wide announcement would cement the restructuring publicly, making it more difficult for my father to reverse course. The board approval, while preliminary, gave me the authority I needed to move forward. Project Phoenix was taking flight. The Callaway Manufacturing of the future was emerging from the ashes of outdated traditions and flawed succession plans. And I would ensure it soared higher than my father or grandfather had ever imagined possible. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m. in the company auditorium. By 10:30, I was reviewing my presentation notes when my assistant Melissa appeared at my door, her expression anxious. Your father has called an executive team meeting in his office, immediately. I checked my watch. This wasn't on my schedule. Who's attending? David, Raoul, the CFO, and Michael. He specifically said it was mandatory. A classic power move. My father was attempting to reassert control, perhaps hoping to present a united executive front before the company-wide announcement. Or worse, trying to derail it entirely. Tell them I'll be there shortly, I said, gathering my materials. And make sure the auditorium setup continues as planned. When I entered my father's office 5 minutes later, the executive team was already assembled. My father stood at the head of his conference table, Michael at his right hand. The tableau couldn't have been more obvious if they'd planned it. Sarah, thank you for joining us, my father said, his tone formal. I've asked the executive team here to discuss implementation of the board's directive. I took the only remaining seat, directly across from Michael. I wasn't aware we had scheduled this discussion. As executive chair, proposed executive chair, I corrected smoothly. The board approved the concept of restructuring, not specific appointments. Those details are to be finalized next week. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Nevertheless, I believe it's important we present a united message to the company. I've drafted talking points for the all-hands meeting that I'd like everyone to review. He slid copies of a document across the table. I scanned it quickly, immediately seeing the issue. The announcement had been reframed as my father's strategic initiative, a visionary restructuring he had designed to optimize leadership capabilities within the family legacy. Michael was positioned as equal to me, with no mention of the aerospace division's central importance or the security breach that had precipitated today's events. It was a masterful attempt to rewrite the narrative, I had to admit, but I hadn't come this far to let my father co-opt my hard-won victory. These talking points don't reflect this morning's board discussion, I said, setting the paper down. They misrepresent both the catalyst for restructuring and the operational reality of our company. They present a unified family vision, my father countered, which is what our employees need to hear right now. I looked around the table at the executive team, people who had worked alongside me through years of transformation, who knew exactly what had happened and why we were here. Their expressions ranged from uncomfortable to openly skeptical. What our employees need is the truth, I said firmly. That this restructuring recognizes the distinct needs of our aerospace division, which generates 65% of our revenue, while creating growth opportunities in new markets. That it aligns leadership expertise with operational requirements. That it reflects modern corporate governance rather than outdated patriarchal succession models. Michael winced slightly at this last point, but remained silent. My father's expression hardened. I won't have you undermining family unity in front of the entire company. This isn't about family unity, I replied. my voice level. It's about business leadership. And the business reality is that I built Callaway Manufacturing into what it is today. The aerospace division that saved this company from bankruptcy was my initiative, executed despite your initial opposition. The client relationships that generate our primary revenue are ones I personally cultivated. The manufacturing innovations that give us market advantage are ones I championed. The room fell silent. I had never spoken to my father this directly in front of others. "Are you suggesting I had nothing to do with this company's success?" my father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm stating facts," I said. "You maintained the legacy business you inherited. I built the future business that's currently paying our bills. Both contributions matter, but they're not the same." The tension in the room was palpable. Even Michael looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat as the confrontation escalated. David broke the silence. "Richard, if I may, the restructuring proposal the board approved specifically recognizes the distinct needs of our business units. Presenting it as anything else would create confusion among employees and potentially concern among clients." Our CFO, Alan Peters, nodded agreement. "Several aerospace clients have already contacted the finance team this morning, seeking reassurance about contract continuity. Clarity about Sarah's continued leadership of that division would stabilize those relationships." I could see my father reassessing the situation. He had clearly expected the executive team to fall in line behind his messaging. Instead, they were backing me, not out of personal loyalty, but because the business case was irrefutable. "The all-hands meeting starts in 20 minutes, I said, rising from my chair. "I'll be announcing the restructuring as approved by the board this morning, with emphasis on business continuity and our vision for integrated aerospace systems. You're both welcome to join me on stage and add your perspectives." It was a calculated offer, giving them the choice to participate in my narrative or appear absent during a critical company moment. Michael surprised me by standing as well. "I'll be there. The business development division represents a significant opportunity, and I'd like to outline some initial thoughts on market expansion." All eyes turned to my father. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, clinging to his authority to the bitter end. Then his shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly. "Very well. We'll present the restructuring together." He gathered his talking points, then fixed me with a steady gaze. "But this discussion isn't over, Sarah. The details of the executive chair role remain to be determined." "Of course," I agreed pleasantly. The board was quite clear about wanting proper governance mechanisms in place. As we left his office, Michael fell into step beside me. "That was direct." "Clarity prevents misunderstandings," I replied. "Something I learned the hard way in this family." He studied me with newfound consideration. "You know, all these years I thought you were content playing second fiddle. Dad certainly presented it that way, that you were happy handling operations while the real leadership decisions were made elsewhere. And now?" A small, rueful smile crossed his face. "Now I'm wondering what else I've misunderstood about how this company actually runs." It was the first genuine moment of self-awareness I'd seen from my brother. Perhaps there was hope for him yet, not as the entitled heir apparent, but as someone who might actually earn his position. As we approached the auditorium, I could see through the glass doors that it was already filled to capacity. Every employee who could be spared from essential operations had gathered to hear what the future held for Callaway Manufacturing. Time to make it official. Time to claim the company I had built. I pushed open the doors and walked to the stage, my father and brother following behind me, no longer leading, but finally, reluctantly, acknowledging my right to show the way forward. The auditorium fell silent as I stepped to the podium. Over 200 employees, from assembly line workers to department heads, filled the seats, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. News of the morning's events had clearly spread throughout the company, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty. Good morning, I began, my voice steady. Thank you all for being here. As many of you have heard, Callaway Manufacturing is undergoing some organizational changes. I want to address these directly and transparently. I glanced to my right, where my father and Michael had taken seats on the stage. My father's expression remained impassive, while Michael seemed unusually attentive. This morning, the board approved a restructuring plan that recognizes the distinct needs of our business divisions while positioning us for future growth. Effective immediately, Callaway Manufacturing will operate with a dual leadership structure. I outlined the new organization, myself as CEO and President of Aerospace Systems, Michael as President of Business Development and New Ventures, both reporting to an executive chair position that would be defined by the board. I emphasized continuity for our core aerospace business while highlighting opportunities for expansion into new markets. This structure leverages our respective strengths, I continued. Our aerospace division, which many of you have helped build into the industry leader it is today, requires deep technical knowledge and established client relationships. The new business development division will focus on market expansion and strategic partnerships, areas where fresh perspectives can create value. As I spoke, I could see the tension in the room gradually dissipating. The employees who had feared dramatic upheaval were visibly relieved by the emphasis on continuity. Those who had worried about job security in a transition to inexperienced, leadership seemed reassured by my continued oversight of core operations. Before I invite my father and brother to share their perspectives, I want to address one other matter. I paused, considering my words carefully. This morning, there was a security incident involving unauthorized visitors to our aerospace production facility. I want to assure everyone that we've taken immediate steps to address this breach and protect our proprietary technology. A murmur rippled through the audience. I continued before it could gather momentum. This incident highlighted the need for vigilance in protecting our competitive advantages. Under the new structure, we'll be implementing enhanced security protocols across all facilities. I turned toward my father and brother. Would either of you like to add anything about the restructuring? My father rose and approached the podium. His expression had shifted subtly, the anger replaced by something more contemplative. Thank you, Sarah. He surveyed the room, making eye contact with longtime employees. Callaway Manufacturing has always evolved to meet changing market demands. My father understood this when he founded the company. I've tried to honor that legacy throughout my leadership. He paused, and what he said next surprised everyone, myself most of all. What I haven't always acknowledged is how dramatically Sarah has transformed this company over the past 8 years. The aerospace division that now forms our core business was her vision, implemented despite my initial skepticism. The advanced materials expertise that gives us market advantage resulted from her persistence in modernizing our capabilities. A hushed silence fell over the auditorium. My father had never publicly credited me with these achievements before. When I announced Michael would become CEO, I was following what I believed was tradition, passing leadership from father to son. He glanced at me. What I failed to recognize was that tradition is meant to serve the company, not the other way around. The restructuring Sarah proposed offers a better path forward, one that honors both family involvement and merit-based leadership. I stood perfectly still, scarcely believing what I was hearing. This wasn't the grudging compromise I'd expected, but something approaching genuine recognition. Michael stepped forward next, adjusting the microphone. I'd like to address the security incident, as I was directly involved. His candor elicited surprised looks throughout the audience. In my enthusiasm to explore potential partnerships, I authorized a facility tour without following established protocols. It was a serious error in judgment, one that I take full responsibility for. He looked around the room, making direct eye contact with various team members. What this morning taught me, among many things, is that leading Callaway Manufacturing requires more than a family name. It requires understanding the complexities of what we do, respecting the expertise that exists throughout this organization, and earning your trust through actions, not titles. The sincerity in his voice seemed genuine, though I remained cautious. People could deliver convincing speeches when their positions were threatened. The Business Development Division represents a significant opportunity, Michael continued. But its success will depend on working in partnership with the expertise that exists throughout the company, particularly in our aerospace operations. I look forward to earning my place in this new structure through results, not entitlement. As Guy. The meeting concluded, employees approached the stage with questions about specific aspects of the restructuring. The overall response was positive, relief mixed with cautious optimism. The clear delineation of responsibilities seemed to reassure both technical staff concerned about Michael's inexperience and administrative employees worried about reporting structure changes. When the auditorium had finally emptied, my father approached me, his expression thoughtful. "Your grandfather kept a private journal," he said unexpectedly. His thoughts on the company, observations about people, decisions he was considering. After he died, I found it in his desk. I waited, uncertain where this was going. There was an entry from about 6 months before he passed, my father continued. About you. He wrote that you had the makings of a true business leader, analytical mind, strategic vision, unwavering determination. Sarah sees possibilities where others see problems, he wrote. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I had always believed my grandfather recognized my potential, but hearing his exact words after all these years was powerful. He also wrote that I would resist seeing it, my father admitted, a rueful expression crossing his face. That my traditional views would blind me to the leader standing right in front of me. He was right, of course. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small leather-bound notebook, worn with age. I think it's time you had this. He would have wanted you to have it. As I accepted my grandfather's journal, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. My father had been wrong, had fought me at every turn, had tried to take away everything I'd built, but in this moment, he was acknowledging truths he had denied for decades. The executive chair position, I said carefully. We should discuss parameters before the board meeting next week. He nodded, surprising me again. I've been thinking about that. Perhaps it should be a transitional role, 18 months, focused on the new structure's implementation. After that, a proper evaluation of leadership effectiveness. It was more reasonable than I had expected. That could work. As my father walked away, Michael approached, hands in his pockets. So, co-leaders, huh? Not exactly what any of us expected. Life rarely follows the expected path, I replied, still processing the events of the past hour. He studied me for a moment. For what it's worth, you were right. About all of it. The company, the leadership requirements, Dad's outdated thinking. He shook his head. I never saw it because I never had to. The system was designed for me to succeed regardless of merit. It was perhaps the most honest thing Michael had ever said to me. The question now, I said, is what you're going to do with that awareness. His response would determine whether our new arrangement had any chance of success. 3 months after the restructuring announcement, I sat in what was now officially my office, the corner suite that had belonged to my grandfather, then my father, and now me. The transition had been neither as smooth as I'd hoped, nor as contentious as I'd feared. The dual leadership structure was taking shape, with defined boundaries and clear reporting lines. My father had surprised everyone by embracing his role as executive chair with unexpected restraint, focusing on strategic guidance rather than operational interference. Whether this was genuine evolution or simply a tactical retreat remained to be seen, but I appreciated the space to lead without constant second-guessing. I opened my grandfather's journal, which had become something of a touchstone during challenging moments. His insights into leadership and family dynamics often seemed eerily relevant to current situations, as if he had somehow anticipated the struggles we would face decades later. A knock at the door interrupted my reading. Michael entered, carrying a folder and looking uncharacteristically serious in a proper business suit, a far cry from the casual attire he'd favored before. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course." I closed the journal and gestured to the chairs across from my desk. "How was the West Coast trip?" Michael had spent the past 2 weeks meeting with potential clients in emerging industries, part of his mandate to diversify our market presence beyond aerospace. "Productive," he replied, opening the folder. 3 solid leads in medical device manufacturing. They're interested in our carbon composite capabilities for next-generation prosthetics. Smaller contracts than aerospace, but higher margins and less regulatory complexity. I reviewed the summary sheets, genuinely impressed by the thoroughness of his analysis. Michael had identified an application for our technology that we hadn't seriously explored, a market adjacent to our core expertise, but requiring different client relationships and approval processes. "This is good work," I acknowledged. "The technical requirements seem within our current capabilities, with minimal retooling." "That's why I pursued it," Michael said. Elaine confirmed we could adapt existing processes without major capital investment. The fact that he had consulted our R&D director before bringing the opportunity forward showed an encouraging evolution in his approach. 3 months ago, he would have presented the idea as a fait accompli, expecting implementation details to be someone else's problem. "I'd like to present this at next week's executive meeting," he continued, "with your support." There it was, the acknowledgement of our respective domains. Medical applications bridged our divisions, utilizing aerospace materials technology but requiring new business development. Under our restructuring, significant cross-divisional initiatives needed mutual approval. "You'll have it," I said. "This is exactly the kind of strategic opportunity we should be exploring." A look of genuine satisfaction crossed Michael's face, not the smug self-congratulation I was accustomed to, but the earned pride of someone who had done good work and knew it. "There's something else," he said, his tone shifting. Dad approached me about modifying the executive chair role. I tensed slightly. "In what way?" "He wants to reduce it to a part-time position after 6 months instead of the original 18. Said he's ready to start enjoying retirement." Michael studied me carefully. "I think he's actually impressed with how things are working, though he'd never admit it directly." This was unexpected. My father relinquishing control ahead of schedule went against everything I thought I knew about him. "What do you think about it?" I asked, curious about Michael's perspective. He considered the question thoughtfully. "I think it's the right move. The company is stable, the new structure is working, and honestly—" He hesitated, then continued. "You've proven you don't need oversight to run this place effectively. You never did." It was perhaps the most direct acknowledgement he had ever made of my capabilities. "We'll need board approval for any changes to the executive chair parameters," I noted, keeping my tone neutral despite my surprise. "Already discussed with Peterson and Ramos. They're supportive, assuming quarterly governance reviews continue as established." Michael closed his folder and stood. "Let me know if you have any other questions about the medical device initiative. I'll have Raoul's team run production feasibility numbers before the executive meeting." As he reached the door, he paused. "You know, I used to think running this company would be easy. Take over Dad's role, delegate the hard stuff, enjoy the perks of being CEO." He shook his head ruefully. "I had no idea what you were actually doing all those years." After he left, I sat in silence, absorbing the conversation. 3 months ago, I had been fighting for recognition, for my rightful place, for the company I had built. Today, that recognition had come from the most unexpected sources. My father, gradually stepping back, my brother, slowly stepping up. the company steadily moving forward under the new structure. It wasn't perfect. Family dynamics never are. But we had found a new equilibrium, one based on capability rather than gender, on contribution rather than birthright, on results rather than tradition. I reopened my grandfather's journal, finding the page where he had written about me all those years ago. At the bottom, in his firm handwriting, was a quote he had apparently found meaningful. "The true measure of leadership is not commanding others to follow, but inspiring them to believe in a shared vision." Perhaps, in our own complicated way, that was what we were finally beginning to do. 6 months after the restructuring, the effects had rippled throughout Callaway Manufacturing in ways both expected and surprising. The quarterly financial results told the most objective story. Revenue up 12% year over year, profit margins improved by 3.5%, and employee retention at an all-time high of 96%. Beyond the numbers, cultural shifts were becoming apparent. Cross-departmental collaboration had increased significantly, particularly between R&D and business development. Elaine's team of engineers was now regularly consulting on Michael's market expansion efforts, ensuring technical feasibility before commitments were made to potential clients. The first medical device contract, Michael's initiative from 3 months earlier, had been signed last week, with production scheduled to begin next quarter. It represented a modest but important diversification of our client base, reducing our reliance on aerospace while leveraging our existing technical capabilities. My own focus had remained on the aerospace division, particularly the integrated systems approach that had been my vision for the past 2 years. The thermal management prototype had moved into production, with our first major client integration scheduled for testing next month. If successful, it would position Callaway Manufacturing as a systems solution provider rather than merely a BR components supplier, a shift that could potentially double our value to key clients. I was reviewing the integration testing protocols when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. My mother, Eleanor Callaway, rarely came to the office. Throughout my father's tenure as CEO, she had maintained a careful separation between family and business, hosting company events at our home, but otherwise staying removed from day-to-day operations. "Mom," I said, rising to greet her. "This is a surprise," she smiled, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I hope a pleasant one. I was having lunch downtown and thought I'd stop by." She glanced around the office, taking in the changes I'd made, replacing the heavy traditional furniture with cleaner lines, adding a small seating area for more collaborative discussions, keeping only my grandfather's desk as a nod to heritage. "It suits you," she said simply. "This office, this role." I'd never been entirely sure of my mother's feelings about the restructuring. She had maintained a diplomatic neutrality throughout the conflict, her loyalties necessarily divided between husband, daughter, and son. "How's Dad adjusting to semi-retirement?" I asked. My father had officially reduced his executive chair role to part-time 3 months ago, though he still attended key meetings and made himself available for consultation. "Better than anyone expected," she replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. "He's taken up golf again, joined the hospital board, and has been reconnecting with old friends from business school. I think having a definitive transition plan has allowed him to let go more easily than if he'd been pushed out suddenly." There was wisdom in that observation, one of the unexpected benefits of our structured approach. By creating a phased withdrawal, with continued respect for his experience, we'd given my father a dignified path toward retirement rather than triggering a defensive battle for control. "And how has it been for you?" I asked. "All these changes." My mother considered the question thoughtfully. "Illuminating. For decades, I watched your father run this company his way. Traditional, hierarchical, sometimes rigid. I saw how it affected both you and Michael, in very different ways." She smoothed her skirt, a gesture I recognized from childhood as something she did when choosing her words carefully. "What you may not know is that I once had my own career aspirations. Before I married your father, I was studying architecture. I had plans, talent even. A wistful smile crossed her face. But that was a different era, with different expectations for women, especially women who married into successful families. This was new information. My mother had never spoken about career ambitions of her own. That's partly why I never intervened in your father's decisions about the company, she continued. I didn't want to be the wife who overstepped, but I always saw your potential, Sarah. Always knew you were the natural leader in the family. Why didn't you ever say anything? I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Would it have helped? She countered gently. Your father needed to recognize your value himself. External pressure would only have made him more resistant. She reached across the desk to touch my hand. And you needed to claim your place through strength, not through someone else's advocacy. There was profound truth in her assessment. The victory I'd achieved had been on my own terms, through my own efforts, based on business results rather than family politics. Actually, my mother said, I didn't just stop by to chat. I have a proposal for you, for the company. This was unexpected. What kind of proposal? The hospital board I mentioned, your father's new project. They're planning a new children's wing and the current designs are uninspiring. I've been sketching some alternatives, focusing on how the space could better serve patients and families. She withdrew a portfolio from her bag, opening it to reveal detailed architectural renderings, professional quality work that showed remarkable talent and vision. They need a corporate sponsor for the project, she continued. It would be a significant community investment, but the visibility and goodwill would be substantial. And I thought perhaps we might collaborate on it. Callaway Manufacturing as the sponsor, with me leading the design committee. I studied the drawings with genuine admiration. They revealed a creative, technical mind I'd never fully appreciated. One that had been relegated to planning dinner parties and managing household staff for decades. This is extraordinary work, Mom, I said truthfully. I had no idea you had this talent. A slight flush colored her cheeks. There are many things we never really knew about each other, I think. But perhaps that's changing. Indeed it was. The restructuring that had begun as a fight for corporate control had created unexpected spaces for growth throughout the family. My father finding purpose beyond the CEO role, Michael developing genuine business skills, and now my mother reclaiming dormant talents. I think it's an excellent proposal, I said. Let's discuss it with Michael next week. Community investment falls under his division, but I can already tell you'll have my full support. As she gathered her drawings, my mother smiled. You know, when your grandfather founded this company, he told me once that his greatest hope was that it would provide opportunities for future generations of Callaways to express their unique talents. I think he would be very pleased with where things stand today. I couldn't help but agree. The company had indeed become a vehicle for each of us to contribute in our own way, not according to rigid traditions or gender expectations, but through our individual strengths and authentic passions. The ripple effects continued to spread, reshaping not just Callaway Manufacturing, but the Callaway family itself. 1 year to the day after my father's announcement that Michael would take over as CEO, I stood at the podium in the same hotel ballroom where it had all begun. The occasion was different this time. Callaway Manufacturing's annual client appreciation event, celebrating our most successful year in company history. The room was filled with aerospace executives, medical device manufacturers, and other industry partners. Our integrated thermal management system had passed all certification tests and was now being implemented by 2 major clients. Michael's diversification initiatives had opened 3 new market segments. Revenue had crossed $65 million, with projections to hit $80 million by year-end. Welcome, everyone, I began, surveying the gathering. 1 year ago, Callaway Manufacturing embarked on a significant transition. one that challenged us to rethink how we operate, how we lead, and how we grow. From my vantage point, I could see my father seated at a front table, looking more relaxed than I could remember. Beside him sat my mother, elegant in a blue dress, her architectural model for the children's hospital wing displayed prominently. In the lobby, Michael stood at the side of the stage, waiting for his part in the presentation, his confidence now grounded in actual accomplishment rather than entitlement. That transition taught us something valuable, I continued, that true strength comes not from rigid adherence to tradition, but from recognizing and leveraging diverse talents, from understanding that leadership takes many forms, from acknowledging that the best solutions often emerge when we challenge our own assumptions. I gestured toward the various division displays around the room: aerospace systems, medical components, emerging technologies, each representing a facet of our expanded business model. Tonight, we celebrate not just financial success, but a more fundamental achievement: building a company where innovation thrives, where merit determines opportunity, and where different perspectives create better outcomes. As I introduced Michael to discuss our market expansion strategy, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The crisis that had begun with my father's announcement had ultimately strengthened both the company and, somewhat surprisingly, our family. My father had found purpose beyond the CEO role, serving on multiple boards and mentoring young entrepreneurs. My mother had reclaimed her architectural passion, with the children's hospital wing now under construction. Michael had developed genuine business acumen, earning respect through results rather than position. And I had secured my place not through inheritance or legal maneuvering, but through demonstrable leadership. Later that evening, as clients and executives mingled, my father approached me, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to me with a nod toward the revenue display, $65 million in bold graphics. "You were right," he said simply, "about everything." Coming from Richard Callaway, it was the highest form of acknowledgement possible. "Not everything," I replied. The dual leadership model was better than my original plan. We needed both perspectives. He considered this, then raised his glass. "To Callaway Manufacturing, past, present, and future." As we clinked glasses, I added my own silent toast: to building something worth fighting for, and to having the courage to fight for it. 5 years have passed since that pivotal moment when my father announced my brother would take over the company I had built. Callaway Manufacturing now generates over $120 million in annual revenue, with a valuation approaching $500 million. We've expanded into international markets, acquired 2 complementary businesses, and established ourselves as industry leaders in both aerospace systems and medical technology. The dual leadership structure that emerged from our conflict has become a case study in effective family business governance, featured in business schools and industry publications. My father, now fully retired, occasionally gives guest lectures on evolving beyond traditional succession, speaking with surprising candor about his own journey from rigid traditionalist to advocate for merit-based leadership. Michael has thrived. In his role, his natural networking abilities and relationship-building skills proving valuable in exactly the ways I had hoped. He recently married, and his wife, a brilliant biomedical engineer, has brought fresh perspective to our medical device division. As for me, I've found balance I never thought possible. The company no longer consumes every waking moment, though it remains my primary professional focus. I serve on several boards, mentor young female executives, and have even found time for personal interests long postponed: travel, photography, and recently, a promising relationship with someone who understands ambition without being threatened by it. What began as a fight for recognition has transformed into something more meaningful: a model for how family businesses can evolve beyond outdated patriarchal patterns while still honoring legacy and kinship bonds. If there's wisdom I would share from this journey, it's this: know your worth. I didn't fight for control of Callaway Manufacturing because of wounded pride or sibling rivalry. I fought because I had objectively built something valuable, something worth protecting. Recognizing your true contributions is not arrogance. It's clarity. Prepare before you need to. The original company charter, the ownership documentation, the business performance metrics, these weren't gathered in panic after my father's announcement. They were part of my ongoing stewardship, my careful attention to both legal foundations and business realities. Find allies who value merit. Throughout this story, people like David, Elaine, Raul, and board members like Diane Ramos supported me not because of personal loyalty, but because they recognized demonstrated capability. Their advocacy wasn't about gender politics. It was about business effectiveness. Seek solutions, not victories. The dual leadership model ultimately benefited everyone: the company, our clients, our employees, and yes, our family. Had I insisted on complete control or walked away entirely, none of us would have achieved what we have today. And finally, understand that sometimes the most important leadership quality isn't technical expertise or strategic vision, though both matter deeply. Sometimes it's simply the courage to stand up and say, "I built this, and I'm not going to let anyone take it away." Not because of tradition, not because of gender, not because of anything except demonstrated capability. The company my grandfather founded, my father stewarded, and I transformed continues to evolve. And in that evolution lies its strength, not as a monument to any individual, but as a living enterprise that honors contribution above all else. That is the legacy I'm most proud to have built. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.